Hi everyone, my name is Kasan and I'm from the Indores, your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining the third episode of the special series on how to Indigenous now, Indigenous governance and diplomacy for the now. Today we are going to talk to some of the world's leading Indigenous peoples representatives and allies to discuss perspectives and practical ideas on this important topic. They are all leaders in their respected fields and committed to inspire and empower Indigenous peoples around the world. And so, first things first, we're just sending words of support, prayer to our communities who are heavily affected by the COVID-19. We know we have 3 chiefs in the Guna and a host of other of our important relations. They are affected right now, and we're just sending prayer and strength thoughts to them. Just a few things that I need to share about this webinar. In this series, it is going to be recorded and repurposed for the Gomaluku podcast. Please engage with each other in the conversation through the chat and comments. That's for our panelists. Let each other know what your answer would be to a question and you've heard a good nod. And so let's start. Keep the conversation going on Twitter, #HowToIndigenousNow. And you can tag Ghazali in your post at Gomaluku, that is at GOMALUKU. Feel free to share any questions, screenshots, or feedback. So we're free to start, and I hope you're going to enjoy. As I stated, I'm your moderator today. This is Kasan. So I'll go directly to our first guest, and that is Les Malezer. He's an Aboriginal activist campaigning for the human rights of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, including wide participation in the human rights of Indigenous peoples at the international level. Now retired, but still active as a voluntary worker. His long involvement at the international level has seen roles in the Indigenous people's rights, the United Nations, Commonwealth Heads of Governments, and various international organizations over the past 35 years. Wow, not yet even 35. So this is an honor, Les. Pursuing acknowledgement of and respect for the rights of Indigenous peoples. Ghazali, take it away.
Thank you so much, Carson, and thank you for hosting, for stepping in for Ini before we start this whole webinar series. Ini, also one of the co-moderators of this webinar series. He was, unfortunately, we just learned that he was also struck by COVID-19. Also particularly to him, as it softens praise to him as well. Thank you for stepping in, Carson. Les, it is. What should I tell about Les? There's nothing too much to tell about Les, because once you start talking about his track record, you could talk for days, for weeks maybe. A lot of knowledge in there, a lot of roles, positions the Aboriginal Australian Aboriginals, Pacific Indigenous peoples, and Indigenous peoples at large. One thing that struck me was the first episode, and there was some kind of discussion going on in the chat between Les and Megan. So I think that's why I would love to start with an easy question. Les, if you could, what is your preference for the decoration? UN drip or drip?
Yes, Ghazali. First off, hello. Thank you very much, Carson, Ghazali. And a big hello to my fellow panelists, many of whom have got experience for a long period of time as well. And a big hello to all the audience out there. It's good to participate in the webinar. The comment, Ghazali, you mentioned is that I made a response because of the reference to the declaration being called the DRIP. And it just reminded me of back in 2007, on the day the declaration was adopted at the General Assembly, we met that evening and had a bit of a celebration and discussion. And one of the first things that came up was, please, let's not call it DRIP. It's not a good acronym. It doesn't sound good when we talk about the DRIP this or the DRIP that, or UNDRIP and so on. And for the most part, that has been the case for these, 13 years now since it was adopted. I think acronyms are acronyms, and sometimes it's necessary to use them, as I often do when I write. But we basically said, let's call it the declaration, or the protocol I try and promote is when we first make a reference to the declaration, that we call it the full name, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And then after that, rather than call it DRIP or UNDRIP, let's call it the declaration. And it's a protocol. So it doesn't have to be observed, but it's a little bit like how we have agreed to use Indigenous peoples with capital I and a capital P, whereas the UN protocol is to use small case, lowercase, when using Indigenous or peoples in that sense as well. And there's many other protocols that have come into practice. So I just know that for me, ever since 2007, when I hear the word DRIP, I sort of recoil or respond in some ways, but of course it's not a crime. It's if that's the way people find it easier to communicate. But I felt that there's a lot of people now that have come into this issue of the United Nations Declaration since 2007 and may not have heard of that sort of view that we had on the day, that we felt it was negative connotation. And I don't know about in other places, but in Australia, in language, we refer to DRIPs, and DRIPs are usually lowly persons or silly persons and so on. So DRIP has a meaning of, say, oh, look at that DRIP over there and that sort of thing. So it does mean something in our colloquial usage of the language. So it's simply that. It is the declaration, and it's always hard to roll off the full title of it. It takes up a sentence in itself. But I think the terminology should be, once we've established what we're talking about, that we keep on referring to the declaration and keep that respectable as much as we can.
Les, zooming in then on the declaration and like all rights of Indigenous peoples in general, what is, in your opinion, the biggest concern on the rights of Indigenous peoples? And do you have any ideas, thoughts, or perspectives to overcome them?
Well, that's a big question, and you know, there's all sorts of concerns of all different scale and all sorts of concerns of all different priorities. But for me, the work that I've been involved in prior to then, I remember we took 25 years from the time that this started in the halls of the United Nations to the time that the United Nations accepted. For us, that was a long time, a quarter of a century. But do you realise now it's actually been 13 or so years since the declaration was actually adopted. And given that we felt drafting over 25 was a long protracted period, unnecessary period, the 13 years since then has really not shown the rate of change or the level of change that we anticipated during those days when we had to get that standard in place as being our benchmark for our futures. And therefore, it is really a high priority to get the declaration into established use, not just in the UN at particular meetings we go to, but particularly back where our people are and where they need to see change on the ground. And I think that that's one of the biggest issues. Every year since the declaration is adopted, we would bring this message back to the UN. We're not seeing the changes happening where it needs to happen with the people. Now that's a negative comment, and there are positive aspects of it in that, and I take my experience here in Australia, people are constantly using reference to that. People who've never been to the United Nations, people who haven't participated in national or regional politics and this sort of stuff themselves are referring to use it and to the declaration. So it is in common reference and common usage. So that's a very, very positive sign that we can see. because our people always carried a sense of their rights and justice. So they still continue to carry that and have now got a reference point. But it also has to translate in relation to the relationship with the state and the sort of physical changes that need to happen, and particularly empowerment. I mean, in Australia, the government has taken the view for many years now, most of this millennia, that they'll only engage in what they call practical reconciliation, improvement of health, education, employment, etc., housing. And this is what the government calls practical reconciliation. But they're not achieving the targets. The targets that the government has set itself are not being achieved. And of course, we expected that they would not achieve them. And only now they're starting to review and ask questions again about whether they're not achieving it. It all comes down to empowerment. People have to be empowered. And if they're not empowered, if they're not involved in making the decisions and making the forward plans and the future plans and so on, then those other things that come with practical reconciliation don't manifest themselves. So I'll pull up there because I realise we're on a time frame here, but it really is a case of my priority has been since 2007 and 2014 when we had the World Conference to see the declaration put into full acknowledgement and recognition with the state.
Let me zoom in a little bit on you touched upon like the Australia case or situation. What do you see developing in terms of Indigenous peoples of Australia and the state relationships in the next, say, 2 to 3 years? What do you see, and is that in line with what you hope to see?
Well, in fact, we've had a pretty bad time here in Australia in terms of dealing with the government. Let's call it the golden period or the heyday of reform and such in Australia happened during the 1970s. And we saw a lot of advancement up there and into the 80s. And even with the existence of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, which was established in 1989. However, since 2005, and even before that, it has all gone negative. And for people who know what happened in Canada with the Conservative government, experienced the same thing, that policies were being undone, our organisations were being dismantled, disenfranchised, our communities were being put back into poverty and dependency and so on. And so the situation has been bleak, and it continues to be bleak because the government has no real objective to see or acknowledge and see that rights are respected here in Australia. They're still on the practical reconciliation side of things, which is more welfare oriented in the way services are delivered and so on. You mentioned in 2 or 3 years what sort of changes we would like to see. Unfortunately, I think that we have to look at things a little bit further than 2 or 3 years. And if, Ghazali, if you allow me time towards the end, a couple of minutes, I want to talk about what I'm calling future proofing, and that this is something I think we need to bring into operation and discuss. How do we future proof our rights and our existence, and what do we need to do now to do that? So the thing with government is that we have to be thinking future proofing, how to get those things happening in government that will ensure that later on we're not having the same battles or we're not losing ground on the whole thing. So I see the next 2 or 3 years as being a very short time frame to get things and to achieve things. And this is where I think the title of your webinars, which is about diplomacy and governance, is exactly the sorts of things that we should be engaging in now. And I'm actually going to emphasise that at the domestic level, at the national level with the state is where to do it, not to go and try and establish better relations at the international level. It just is not working and will not work. We still have an agenda at the international level which we have to pursue, and it's part of where we keep our profile as being peoples with self-determination alive, is at the international level. But we have to pursue the change with the state, which is where the change needs to happen from the colonial days and from patronising and welfare approach and taking of territories, is where we focus on. So for the next 2 or 3 years, concentration on diplomacy, concentration on governance and structuring, and how that relates to the state is really the most important thing.
Well, let me set you up to unpack that a little bit, because I think it's very interesting to talk about future-proofing. Also, like how does self-determination, the right to self-determination, fit into that, into your view, and also what's a key thing that the central government must do, and practical things that Indigenous governments or Indigenous peoples, can do right now in terms of making sure that future-proofing is happening.
Yes, thanks, Ghazali. In fact, I've got very short comments to make here on that particular thing. I've listed 4 things. One is we've got to have direct engagement with the state. So that needs some form of unity, cohesion, structuring as how it goes on. I think the US gave us some idea during the Obama years when the president agreed to have his annual consultation with leaders of the Native Americans and so on, about how am I going, what am I doing, and so on. But that sort of direct engagement with the state is important. We need to have representation, and I suppose it happens all around the world, not only with Indigenous but with non-Indigenous, that people who get up as being representatives and have a leadership title and so on, there's a lot of cynicism behind that, and that's a legacy of colonialism as well. You don't trust the people who get up and say that they're representing your interests. But we have to have representation. We have to work out how that representation is identified. In the past, in Australia, there's been what they call opinion leadership, where people have got up and they've made things, and people generally say, yeah, they're speaking, that's what I agree, and so on. But they rely upon that person opinion leadership. More recently, there's been this process of elections and choosing representation through, quasi-democratic processes and so on. But representation is important, and political profile. There has to be that profile there to engage with government. That's what's going on. We've got a bit of that going on in Australia in terms of treaty discussions that are going on now. We had some with constitutional change, but those things have not held up. The structuring has been poor, it hasn't been strongly supported, and there's probably more opposition than support generating in our communities for those things. We've got to build that political profile and so on. I've also added educational role. So as we would know, and particularly those who live in the parliamentary democracy state nations, that the public has to come along with this. The governments don't just go and do something unless the public want them to do that and are putting them in a position of that. So we have to play an educational role, including amongst their own people, to achieve unity. And the last thing I've mentioned in my list about governance and diplomacy is about lawmaking, because laws are still being made, court decisions, interpretations of laws are still happening and so on. And I know in some places that is going on and has always been going on, but we do have to look more carefully about laws. And in Australia, the thing I've been concentrating on is that under the third convention, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, there's a requirement there for special measures and concrete measures to be part of the overcoming of racism. And special measures have criteria established as to what are special measures and what are not, what are discriminatory. And those criteria are important. That is, they have to be temporary measures, they've got to be able to be measured, they've got to have specific purpose as to what they're achieving and how they're to be achieved, so they can be measured along the way. But they also have to have the consent of the people that the legislation applies to. Unfortunately, in Australia, our courts don't accept those criteria. They say that's not in the legislation in Australia of the Racial Discrimination Act. So that's one of the things we'll continue to battle here, is to make sure that lawmaking in Australia by any of our parliaments in a federation have a clear understanding of what is discriminatory law and what is not discriminatory law, and what are special measures to overcome disadvantage and what are concrete measures to ensure that inherent rights to territory, to heritage and so on are protected by law. So these are the things that I think that have to be looked at, particularly in that process.
No, thank you so much, Les. Also, like unpacking the future-proofing concept. I think that's very helpful for a lot of people watching, but also like going to watch this, as in giving a little bit of practical ideas, tools, like how to ensure the rights of Indigenous peoples, not only like the next 2 to 3 years, but beyond that. Unfortunately, that is a conversation that's going to take a lot longer, and we only have a couple of minutes. Anything, final question that we have not touched upon that you're proud of, maybe curious about, or want peoples or Indigenous peoples to think about? Anything that?
Yeah, thanks, Ghazali. And I will mention future proofing as a thing I did put down for just to touch upon. And I'll be very quickly just saying that for people like myself, being involved for many years now, I'm seeing many of my colleagues are passing on, and that I see in the Australian context the difficulty about the younger generation coming in, not necessarily having the same experience and knowledge base that we gathered over the time. And so to future-proof, we need to ensure that we are preparing for succession, educating and training, and that we look at what resilience is all about, of how will we continue into the future to be resilient, or are we just simply moving into mainstream middle class Western society? How do our cultures stay the same? How do our traditions? How does our worldview, the most important thing, which is about sustainable use of resources and harmony with the natural environment, and even a different spiritual value about what do we worship? What is the thing that we have a responsibility to? So this is what I call future-proofing, and I hope that we'll, over further conversation, be able to give some definition to that and maybe get some global movement in that area. Thank you, Ghazali.
Thank you so much, Les, for your time, for your dedication over the last decades, years, and hopefully that we can enjoy your knowledge and wisdom for a lot longer than that. Carson, you mentioned that like the track record of Les has been longer than, well, it's been longer around than you were actually around. What do you think so far?
Yeah, thank you so much, Les, for your wisdom, knowledge, and of course, you mentioned something really important, sustainable intergenerational knowledge transfer, or something, some sort of, how do we make it sustainable intergenerational wise? And that is a challenge as well in my community, and that is that is my key takeaway today. Even though you said it towards the last part, it's powerful because for my generation, we feel there's that detachment from, for example, for my people, those who took up the fight and won that fight, and now my generation were not aware of, I mean, they didn't get the real fight. They don't even understand. So, and it's important for sustaining the movement. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ghazali. So I think we're going to our next guest, and all the way from Pacific as well. And we have Hunanatu Matoke. Her nickname as well is Huna, and comes from Maluku, Nuahulu tribe on the Seram Highland. She has a strong background in Indigenous languages and is currently the Secretary General of Saniri Alifuru, the Alifuru Council of Maluku people, on a mission to work with other Indigenous nations to learn about how to work together to improve the lives of Indigenous peoples, their customs and rights to life in Maluku and all over the world. Wow, that is powerful, Huna. Ghazali, please help Huna.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm from Maluku as well, so I could not start a webinar series without having at least someone from Maluku that is part of a governing Indigenous Peoples representative institution to be part of this whole dialogue. So luckily, it's no longer like, and I have to explain where Maluku is from, but somebody else can also be the face of Maluku. Not that I want to be the face, not that people want me to be the face. Sorry, I'm going off topic now. Huna, give us, let's start right into this. Give us some context, background, like short 2-minute origin story of the council.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. Okay, I will talk about Saniri. Okay, Saniri is like a council here for Maluku peoples, and we're living long before the government, or so we're living with the system, the custom system, and I'm sorry, I'm a little bit shy.
Take your time.
I'm
Take
sorry.
your time.
Okay, so I don't know how to start, but that is what I'm thinking about the Alifuru peoples, that we still live with all our cultures, languages, and still. So Saniri Alifuru is one of like organization to work with the peoples here, engage to the young generation and also the elders around like a village, islands, because Maluku is, I think it's big, so we have to go to around the islands to engage to our generation, our peoples in the village, and it's far away, so need time. And so Saniri, now it's not easy because the COVID-19, so we just, and we cannot using the technology to talk to our people in the village or in the island. So yeah, it's, I think.
Describe a little, so like Saniri Alifuru, the Alifuru Council is what you described, an organization or representative institution. Who are the members of the council? Like who are you or is it like who are you are the members of the council? Is it the village elders or
yeah, so yes, so the members come from all the villages in Maluku, so the elders and also the young generation. Some of the young generation is also joined with Saniri Alifuru. So we working together to collaboration work from the elders and then with the generation, the young generation, and also women. So we're trying to collaboration work or mine, or to see our going back to our life before all things happen now, like technology and anything like that. So like Saniri have to asking like about the what's called sejarah,
history.
The history of our ancestors and everything, where we come from, because of Maluku, it's separate in the like islands to the islands. So we have to know our roots, where we come from. So our leaders, elders is important for us to asking, and they can explain to us about where we come from, like West Maluku or East Maluku, and we have to know that to be one. And also for the young generation, we have to like educate them, and they have to know who they are, so they can keep their identity, their languages, their cultures, and everything, so they can fight for their rights.
So you mentioned rights of the Alifuru people of Maluku. What, in your opinion, is important to change the future of the Alifuru people to make it more positive?
It's a little bit hard to talking about this. Like what the Saniri Alifuru start maybe almost 3 years now, and we can see like as it's moving, even it's just slow, but we can see that we have something in the futures. Like we're thinking about the educate our generation. So we start with the education, knowledge and things like that. And so, and from the education, they can go up to the economic change, maybe slow, but we can see that they thinking more than before, that is. And also thinking about the politic is happening right now is really, wow. It's like a change all our indigenous people's mind. The mindset is really changed to the politic. So everything is politics. So they forget about like where they come from, who are them, or things like that. That is what we think.
So let's talk a little bit about like the people around you, because that is very because we talked about who the members, but you're the Secretary General. You obviously you have a team, maybe. So like describe your team. How do you determine or decide who's valuable to your council's mission and who's not? What do you think about that?
Okay. Yeah, this is talking about like working with their heart, because everything is money. So thinking about that, it's important too, because life goes on. So people need something to. So I'm working with like some of youth, young generation. So, and then some of I forgot, wartawan.
Journalists.
Journalist. Sorry, too nervous to talking about this. Okay, so if I can, I have to see if they working with their heart. It's not asking for anything before they do what they have to do. That is, so for now we're going too slow, but I'm trying. I'm as like a secretary, so I can trying to help them think or please, or that is.
Oh, that's okay. And thank you so much for sharing that you work a lot with youth and people that are interested in thinking more about hearts and not about and minds and not about money. I think that's very important. Explain me a little bit, if you can. We're talking about indigenous diplomacy, so talking to states, making sure that the rights of indigenous peoples are respected in the UN level, but also on a grassroots level in Maluku and Australia, like you heard before, through Les. How do you look at the activities that is happening at the international level? Do you have any contact with the international level or own experience? Just talk a little bit about that.
Okay. I really really want to know more when I connect to Ghazali before. So when Ghazali talking about indigenous peoples, and I'm concerned that we have a way to our nation, our people. So I think 2018, I was attend a conference in South Dakota, or that's IITC, I think. That is the first time I attend the international level for indigenous peoples, and I see a lot, and I can like, wow, that is my first time, and I cannot talk anything when I'm there. I just sitting there and hear and see what they talk about their peoples and the diplomacy and things like that. It's touched my heart to do more, but engage to the international, like international level. The first time I think I cannot do that because I'm a young woman and my culture is like a woman cannot do anything. We can do something, but it's not more than. So when I was in IITC conference, really thinking deep. I'm thinking so deep about our nation, our generation, our young people, because when I'm there, I think some youth team or what schools, and I can see that. And also, sometimes I'm reading about UN diplomacy, and it's really engaged myself, and it's really in touch myself to work more or learn more from each indigenous peoples around the world. And I can see which way we can go to the international level. It's not easy, but
maybe this is a very practical question for you, and a better question for us actually, as not us, but like the people in the panels of the previous episodes and the next episodes, is what would you like to know more about? What is it something that you would really like to know about Indigenous diplomacy, Indigenous rights, that people like myself, Les before, and Andrea will come after, and Miriam and Elsa and Rodion, what is it something that you would like to know more about?
What I want to know is how to help my peoples, like, because what to say about the government system, and like my peoples, sometimes when they hear about international level, they are like more confidence, because anybody can stand in the middle of them or to help them to. And I hope when we go more to the international level, we can find or helping somebody helping from outside of our local government system or things like that. So that is my hope, that we can find some encourage or help, or maybe funding or things like that, and so we can go more to work more.
I think that is very, very helpful, and thank you so much for sharing that, because it also puts this entire webinar series in a good perspective, in how we can be more valuable to people that are setting up their governance institutions or starting to engage or become interested in Indigenous diplomacy. One final question for you, and you can talk about whatever you want. Is there anything that you'd really would like to share, talk about, or want other Indigenous people to think about or ask? For the next 2 minutes.
I don't know what to talking about, like a conflict. Thinking about conflict, and I don't know how to do reconciliation right now. That is what my questions on my head, because like something's going on inside the one side, maybe because of the politics, I don't know. I'm trying to go between two
You talk about mediation, is that so?
Mediation, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm talking about mediation, and I'm stuck because I see from the law side, but I didn't find any kind of way how to help them, because of maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a politics. That's why they are fighting, just because of their land. There's like a gift from the ancestor, and so that is the question. How to maybe like a mediation to make a peace or things like that, and also like another things is education. I don't how can help our generation to keep their their mother tongue language. So that is a lot of question about that. We let's open the school for that, or go to the village and just trying to help them thinking about their ancestor or their languages, or that is coming up, and I don't know the way how to help. But now we're trying to do small things like open the school, make the columns and write a song in the mother tongue language, and write the books using their mother tongue language, something like that. So maybe some of you guys can give me encourage, give me idea, give me solution. I really like to do that.
No, thank you so much, Huna, for your time. I know it's very late in Ambon, in Gomaluku. So thank you so much for your time. Also for your questions. I think that's very helpful as well. I think hopefully I'll stay in contact with all the panelists, and I'll ask the questions as well. People that are watching, if you have an idea on like mediation between communities, or safeguarding language of indigenous languages, like if you have any ideas, send Huna or send us a message, or drop them in the comments. That would be very helpful. Thank you so much, Huna. I know we only have a couple of minutes time, so thank you so much. And I'll give it back to Carson.
Thank you, Ghazali. Thank you, Huna. Thank you for sharing about your peoples, about your leadership, and your views concerning the Alifuru. I think I know much more than I knew before coming to this call. And Ghazali, just before I knew you, I mean, like knowing you like the way we met last year, I used to search about the Alifuru because I didn't know. And now when you mentioned and you asked our sister to share, that was very powerful. And I know so many people right now are knowing much about the Alifuru and the challenges. And I can go back, especially what you're just saying, just reiterating that they need our help as well. So let's get to our next guest. And this is extremely powerful. So this is Rodion Sulyandziga. Belongs to the Udege community, one of the indigenous peoples of the North Siberia and Far East of the Russian Federation. The total population is about 1,600 left. Udege means forest people. And Rodion, and I quote, says that I have started my political career since 1987 to protect our land and forest rights at the local level and continue my advocacy at the domestic and international arena. I want to know much about this. Over to you, Ghazali.
Thank you so much, Carson. Rodion is, in my view, one of the most very experienced indigenous diplomats out there, not just from Russia, but indigenous peoples in general. Also, what a lot of people don't know, he is very good at ping pong. We had a ping pong tournament while we were in New York as a lobbying team for the World Conference, and he beats every single one at the World Council of Churches. Aside from that, thank you so much, Rodion, for being on this webinar series. Let me start off because you're such a strong person, such a strong personality. What is your greatest strengths, if you're willing to talk about that, and how has that impacted your career trajectory since 1997?
Yes, hello everyone, Ghazali, Carson, and our distinguished co-panelist. I'm so glad to see all of you safe and secure under this time. And but first, before moving to your question, Ghazali, I would like to thank you and your team, and congratulations with a great idea to connect Indigenous United Nations and create a new dialogue and exchange virtual platform to keep Indigenous solidarity, to touch governance and diplomacy under this pandemic time. And also Indigenous people should use the new technology as a new tool to protect and promote human rights of Indigenous peoples at different levels. And secondly, I also would like to thank you for different languages interpretation service provided in terms of access, inclusiveness, awareness, and also regional and cultural balances and visibility. And so I am so pleased to contribute to this global dialogue to empower the Indigenous diplomacy and movement. So with regards to your question, it's easy, but it's also difficult question. I was born in a completely different political situation. I was born in Soviet Union. So, and this time it was a completely different political agenda. And then we saw the demise of Soviet Union, we saw the era of perestroika and the current situation, and we did a lot of hopes. So, and of course, my greatest strength, it's my family, it's my people. It's a very small community, it's only 1,600 left. And also my first job was a teacher and principal of school. After the university, I got a good Soviet education and came back to my community, working with young generation. So, and that is my biggest strengths, my family, my people, and my advocacy.
No, thank you so much, Rodion. And I apologize to you because I would love to have a question. Just it was challenging to put the right number of Russian interpreters in here, but I'll promise you next time around, definitely with you and Pavel, we'll definitely make sure that we have that feature covered. Rodion, I've always said it, you are in a very special position lately because you're both EMRIP member as well as the facilitated working group member on the local communities and Indigenous Peoples platform under the Climate Change Convention. So the way that I see it, I should not say the way that I see it. What are you hoping to bring to both sides, human rights and climate change?
Yes, you're right. I am a current member of this both United Nations venues. And on the one hand, these are two completely different bodies under the United Nations structure and space with different and specific agenda and mandates. But on the other hand, there is a quite strong synergy between them. Because, you know, EMRIP is a human rights division focused on the Indigenous peoples and human rights under the Human Rights Council and led by Indigenous people experts in order to protect and to provide a solid, strong studies and recommendation for human rights bodies under the United Nations. But on the other hand, if you look at the UNPFII, in particular, Facilitation Working Group under the Climate Global Negotiation, our aim is to humanize climate change impact and commit human rights-based approach. So, and it's helpful to promote both agenda under both United venues, because climate change is also human rights agenda. But what is more important, we as Indigenous peoples, we should move forward from the status of victims of climate change to originators of sustainable development and solution agenda in order to create a strong climate resilience community at the global level, and particularly at the local level.
Rodion, I remember you saying 3 words that are very important to you: respect, recognition, and remedy. Very 3 important themes for, if you can, of course, each of the 3. What would you like to see at the end of it? How would you like to see that? Any thoughts on, any thoughts on that? And what could be like the first step for Indigenous peoples?
Obviously, respect and recognitions of Indigenous people rights and their traditional rights, their land rights, is a cornerstone for global IT political agenda to protect and to promote human rights of Indigenous peoples. And of course, we can celebrate the United Nations achievement for the last 2 decades. We already mentioned here the UN Declaration on Indigenous People Rights, creation of expert mechanism, permanent forum, and other thematic venues on climate change, on the CBD, and others. But the era of colonial time is not ended, because when we are talking about remedy, we are talking about the resource colonies represented by the big industrial economy and government, particularly looking at the indigenous land as a marketplace or marketable commodity to be used for the economic growth and profit. So this is triangle: respect, recognition, and remedy based on the colonial and post-colonial period. How we can create completely new agenda based on the human rights recognition.
Thank you so much for giving more context to that. Do you have any ideas on that new agenda? Is there something that you really would like to see?
Of course, we should work together and to increase our global diplomacy, our joint solidarity. But unfortunately, there are still growing gaps and obstacles between global, regional, national, and local community level. So, and a lot of work to do, and we should learn, we should work together in order to increase all our skills and diplomacy at all levels.
Thank you so much for unpacking that, Rodion. If you're up to, if you're having ideas on this, because this is something that I've been on my mind for a while now. Like, Russia is a very big and very diverse region. I'm not just talking about the country, but the indigenous region. So how do you understand and execute, utilize representation of indigenous peoples in Russia? What do you think are the challenges in that? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, Ghazali, it's a very good question, because if you like to talk about Russia and its indigenous peoples, we should have some kind of historic background and look at the also Soviet time and pre-Soviet time, and also at the current situation. Because through the Soviet era, we never raised the issue of our land rights, our traditional knowledge, because all Soviet regions with indigenous people population had been effectively de-indigenized, assimilated and integrated into the Soviet society based on the paternalistic ideology. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union and its system, indigenous peoples took on the second life for the first time. And we as indigenous peoples of Russia, we were one of the last to join the United Nations agenda and to the international indigenous peoples movement. So, and that was a great time of hopes, how we can work together, how we can seek better ways of preserving our identity and land. But if you look at the modern story of Russian indigenous peoples, sadly, it's a story of a conscious strategy of erasing indigenous communities from the Russian landscape in many ways, socially, politically, legally, through the folklorization of indigenous rights. And today, the Russian state policy is more inclined to remove the last obstacle standing on their way of its Arctic dreams. Because our traditional land is so rich of natural resources, and the Russian economy and power is still based on the exploitation of natural resources. We are not stateless, but we live in the shadow of the states. Geographically, we are living in a very remote areas from both federal and regional capital center. And politically, we are still marginalized and at the margin of power. And demographically, we are fast disappearing. If you look at the statistics, we have more than 12 indigenous groups with a population less than 1,000. So, and from my point of view, while we were among the last to join the United Nations agenda and the global IP movement, we can become the first to quit it due to this authoritarian regime. And it's getting more challenging and risky to oppose the state propaganda machine and smart aggressive diplomacy. So how can the country which has not ratified any legally binding documents on indigenous rights be pointed as an example of successful indigenous policy? For me, it's still a mystery, but it's also the reflection of the real situation in my country.
Rodion, thank you so much for giving us like the full your view of the situation in Russia at the moment, challenges, and also like what you would like to see. Anything the Indigenous Peoples movement at large, allies, can help you with, that you can see that can really benefit the Indigenous Peoples movement in Russia?
Well, I think it's also a big issue related to diplomacy and governance issue. And what kind of diplomacy we are talking about? You mentioned ping pong we were playing many years ago. But from my perspective, diplomacy is also political ping pong with two roads ways. But I believe the indigenous people's diplomacy is having only one privilege: to tell a true story and to tell untold and unreported stories. And of course, we need solidarity from other indigenous peoples. And we had to learn so fast and so quick after USSR collapse. And we are still learning a lot from other regions. And we appreciate very much our first international contact, particularly with our Arctic indigenous brothers and sisters like Inuit, Second Council, and Sami Council. So it's a very unpredictable and very serious time. But we should be optimistic and strengthen our capacity and also diplomatic skills at all levels, at the international, but also at the domestic one.
Thank you, Rodion. Any final things that we might have not touched upon that you really want to talk about, curious about, or want other people to think about? We have like 90 more seconds. So anything that you really want to bring forward?
I have some observation and also recommendation for your great job and this how we can follow up with a virtual conference created by your team, Ghazali. And there are three, I believe, key issues from my point. I believe in youth and education. So we should increase youth participation and educational, provide more educational opportunity for young people and young leaders. The second point, it's very timely to raise the issue and to promote, protect not only cultural heritage of indigenous peoples, but also natural heritage. And the many reasons, including climate change. And we must keep our planet and our natural heritage for the sake of the planet. And finally, I would like also to recommend you to continue such kind of episodes and bringing together also a group of friends of indigenous peoples to elaborate more the governance and diplomacy issue, and also trying to invite strong international lawyers working for indigenous people rights and protection.
Thank you so much, Rodion. I will definitely take on board all your recommendations. Matter of fact, like one of the final episodes, we have not really come up with a format yet. So I think that the bringing in the group of friends. So group of friends, in what we mean by that is for people that are watching and listening, is like states that are friends of indigenous peoples within the United Nations. So definitely a very good one. I will, and hopefully then you'll be part of the discussion. We're very much looking forward to that. Thank you so much, Rodion, for your wisdom, for your perseverance, for your work. I know that things are challenging, but like you said, solidarity. And as always, I'm very solid in solidarity with you and your indigenous peoples and many of the colleagues that are watching as well. I'm sure. Thank you so much, Rodion, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carson.
Yeah.
That was powerful. That was a lot of information there.
Very systematic, patient, and knowledgeable. I think Rodion is a ton of knowledge about the indigenous people's rights, especially when it comes to governance. Thank you so much, Rodion. The immediate former chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum for Indigenous Peoples, Mariam Wallet Abubakrini, is a Tuareg woman, Walt Tamashek from the Timbuktu. She has a background of traditional education and as a medical doctor from the University of TC Ozu, Master in Humanitarian Action from the University of Geneva, focusing on interventions in crisis situations, and a Bachelor in Education from University of Ottawa. She has joined the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples for the last 6 years, where she brought her unique multidisciplinary and indigenous background as an expert for two consecutive years as the chair, giving her strong leadership. Mariam, what a bio. Welcome to the show, and Ghazali, please take it on.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for being with us. Really appreciate it. We all know Miriam, but we also know her sister Saudata. also active in the United Nations. You both have children. Let's say both your children want to follow their mother's paths. What is the biggest lesson or specific qualities you want to give them? And maybe like in extension of that, what is your observation about the next generation of Indigenous diplomats? Welcome, Miriam.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Carson et Ghazali.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Ghazali.
Je voudrais tout d'abord reconnaître les territoires autochtones non cédés duquel je parle ce matin.
About the land from which the indigenous land that I'm talking about and talking from this morning.
Oui, mes félicitations
I would like
toute
to
l'équipe de
congratulate
Gomaluku, vous-même,
everyone.
Ghazali, mais
I would
aussi
like to congratulate
le DOCIP, Drumbeat,
DOCIP. I would like to thank the partners. I'd like to thank Ghazali
pour cette excellente initiative.
for this excellent initiative.
Il y a un grand besoin que nous rattrapons le pas dans les médias sociaux et les domaines de l'information.
A need to catch up with what is happening on social medias, etc.
Oui, c'est important que nous
It's
aussi
essential for us to
parlons de nous, que nous nourrissons
speak for
l'information.
ourselves. We need to feed into this tale
Alors,
and to
si
feed
je
into the
reviens
information that is
à la
being shared
question
about
que
us.
vous m'avez posée,
Now, to answer the question that you have
voudrais,
asked me, I would like
souligner par exemple
highlight, for
la
instance,
résilience comme
as
absolument une des
one of the
qualités ou valeurs à
crucial
développer.
values
Donc,
to be
par
developed.
exemple, si nous revenons à mon
For
histoire
instance,
personnelle
going
et de
back to
ma
my
génération
personal
de Touareg,
experience and the Tuareg
dans la
generation
région
that
du
I'm
Mali,
from
du
in
Sahel. Donc, nous
Sahel,
avons connu en
in
1985. Donc, je me limite seulement
1985.
à ma région.
I only want to talk about my
à ma
region here.
génération, pardon. Donc, en 1985,
In
nous avons connu
1985,
une sécheresse.
there was
Donc,
a drought
c'est une
in the
catastrophe
region.
pour nous.
It was
Nous avons
a
connu
tragedy for
également
us,
un conflit en
but it was also
1991.
a conflict
Et
in
tout récemment,
1991, rather.
en 2012, nous
And
avons
recently, in
connu un deuxième conflit qui
2012, there was a
continue.
second conflict that is still
Donc, de
ongoing.
ces trois événements
So with
marquants
these three
qui nous ont touchés
events
directement, nos
that
familles
directly
et
impacted
nos
us, our
communautés,
families,
nous
and
en
our
sommes
communities,
sortis
we
résilientes, mais
came out more
également,
resilient from these events,
si on veut dire, aguerries, plus fortes.
but even
Et
stronger.
nous avons su passer
And we were able to
ces difficultés. Donc, c'est ça.
overcome these
Ce n'est pas
difficulties.
notre histoire personnelle à nous en tant que Saudata
So,
et moi-même.
Saudata and myself are not concerned by this history personally, but this is part of our history and the Tuareg history and the women in our community. So I think the key word
Par la
here
suite,
is
on a la
resilience.
persévérance et la patience.
Then we
Donc,
need
pour la
to
persévérance
be
et la
patient.
patience, par exemple, Rodion, mais également Les et ceux qui ont parlé
And
avant.
perseverance is important as well. Rodion mentioned it.
Influencer les politiques, ça
We
prend
need to be able to
beaucoup d'années.
influence
Et parfois, tout
policy making schemes,
combien
and
de temps, par
sometimes
exemple,
it can take years and years.
a pris entre sa tentative
need to
d'être
be
écoutée aux
patient.
Nations Unies
There
et
were
dans
many
les années 1920
attempts to
et
be listened to
d'effectivement avoir un forum
at the UN,
dédié aux
and
peuples autochtones au sein des
it
Nations
took a lot of time to
On a
have
eu un
our
forum
own
dans les années 2000.
forum
Donc, vous voyez, c'est
within the
la
UN,
durée des
and we
continuités.
managed to obtain it in the
Aussi,
years
combien de
2000.
temps ont pris
So
les
again,
négociations pour
how long
l'entente
did the
sur une déclaration
negotiations took
qui
to have
respecte
a
les droits
declaration that would
des peuples autochtones? Là
highlight the
encore,
rights
c'est
of indigenous
plusieurs
peoples?
décennies, donc
Again,
c'est plus
it
de
took
3
years
décennies.
and years, over
Malgré
3
les
decades, I believe.
plaidoyers
So despite
continus,
this
des milliers de
advocacy
délégués
work
autochtones,
that
donc
needs to
cette
continue,
déclaration est à sa 13e année,
this
mais
is the third year of the recognition
nous
of the
retrouvons
declaration.
encore avec
And yet here we
certains
are
États ou certains acteurs
with
qui ignorent
some
cette
stakeholders
déclaration.
and governments that ignore.
Elle ne fait pas partie des éléments à prendre en premier lieu pour parler des peuples autochtones ou traiter.
And for them, it's not one of the main tools to use to talk about indigenous
La
rights.
patience et la
So again,
persévérance
patience and perseverance are values that need to be
promouvoir
fostered if we want to be able to promote indigenous people's rights. So these are the three values that I believe
que je voudrais passer non seulement
young people should have,
à ma
and I would like to
fille
transmit not only to my daughter, but
autochtones,
to all the indigenous women and girls everywhere across the world.
Comme étant mes filles, mais
Because I see each and every indigenous woman as my daughters or my sisters. They are my family. I have a very big family.
Oui, donc c'est tous les près de 500 millions d'autochtones.
We're talking about
Merci beaucoup pour cette
500 million indigenous peoples. They're all my family members.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for laying that all out. Thank you so much for everything that you did before, and also like sharing what you just now shared. You talked about perseverance, patience, as well as that also that contributed to the Permanent Forum, the realization of the Permanent Forum. You were chair of the Permanent Forum and did an amazing job. Can I ask you a little bit about? It's about providing value for the next year's Permanent Forum participants. Tips maybe specifically for speeches and statements. What did you as a chair listen to? Structures so that people that are coming to the Permanent Forum next year can have be more effective in their speeches.
Merci, Ghazali. Donc ça, c'est une très bonne question parce que...
Thank you. This is a very relevant question, Ghazali.
Souvent, les délégués autochtones sont perdus. Il y a beaucoup de questionnements par rapport à
they have a lot of questions when it comes to
Donc, je voudrais rappeler que l'instance permanente, comme
participation, and I would like to reiterate that
les Nations Unies pour les peuples autochtones est le fruit d'un plaidoyer de nos
forum
aînés autochtones et de nos amis.
The fruit born from strong and lengthy advocacy work for our indigenous brothers and sisters. So they need to walk hand in hand with us in this process. It is essential to make sure that the forum remains the forum as we built it, to make sure that there is constructive discussion between indigenous peoples and different stakeholders.
Des questions autochtones préoccupantes dans
so we really deal with the most urgent issues of indigenous people, such as health, education,
la culture,
human rights, culture, the environment, economic and social development, but also emerging issues such as women or indigenous people with disabilities. Each and every indigenous delegate that comes to the forum is there to talk about his or her own community. So it's difficult to give advice on the way that they should address their issues. Because we all have our issues. Even when it comes to research on indigenous issues, we need to be very careful, because the person who will be presenting his or her concerns is the expert, because they know firsthand what is going on in their communities. They are the best people to talk about their own situation. However, if I had one piece of advice to give, would be a piece of advice to the Secretariat and the forum, which is to give information in a timely manner with regards to how much time people will have to take the floor and what is the agenda, etc. So I think organizations can do a better job at communication information. Now, when it comes to the caucuses and the regions, yeah, the
Et on a également des caucus thématiques.
regions, and we also have
les langues autochtones, les
thematic or caucuses based on themes, so women's caucus, etc. And I think that these groups should have sessions that are open to all the delegates of the region concerned, so they can all participate. This way, there would be more knowledge sharing, because there are people who are used to these bodies and could
un élément important. Il faut s'organiser de nos thématiques régionales, mais aussi.
So I do think that we need to focus on an organization based on our regional concerns, but also based on themes
les experts membres
to be more efficient.
de l'instance
with regards to the current
secrétariat de l'instance, les DOCIP,
former
les milieux académiques,
members
qui a
of the forum,
avec nous,
DOCIP,
de l'université Columbus, mais également
and different research bodies, including the Columbus universities. These are stakeholders that can play an incredible role in preparatory meetings. They can train people on the methodology, the format of the meeting. There is a lot to be done in this field, and we need better collaboration across these different actors. If I had a piece of advice to give to Indigenous delegates themselves, it is important to hold preparatory meetings within their own organizations and entities. They need to prepare beforehand, based on the methodology offered by the forum and based on their concerns. We know that we need to be concise and very brief because we don't have much time to present what we want to present. But we need to make use of all the spaces that we can leverage during the forum. And we need to be able to engage with the right stakeholders. There are side events, for instance, or bilateral meetings within the UN. And these are the times where you can really engage with other people and enrich your network.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I can see people writing really fast because there's so much knowledge and so much ideas in there. So thank you so much for that. I have one question for you. You are currently African member to the Temporary Committee for Enhanced Participation. What does Indigenous people's participation mean to you, and how would you like to see Indigenous peoples from the African region benefit from the enhanced participation process?
Merci. Donc, la participation des peuples autochtones pour moi,
the indigenous
c'est que le monde ne se prive pas du potentiel de la diversité dans tous les domaines.
The whole world can benefit from diversity because Indigenous peoples reflect and echo this diversity. For health, for instance, there is a team of researchers and myself. We are working on the welfare and the health of Indigenous peoples.
La terre n'est pas en santé. Comment pourrions-nous l'être?
And we observed that the soil that we were living on, the lands that we were living on, were not healthy. So how could we be healthy? And there was a report that was published which recommended to have one health approach, a holistic approach about health, about the health of our land, the health of our people, but also the land, the health of our animals. Indigenous peoples have always had this holistic health approach. We didn't have to wait for the COVID-19 pandemic to have this approach to link animal welfare, human well-being,
donc à l'Assemblée générale des
environmental health.
Aussi aux autres entités, il est important que les
peuples soient
étables. Donc c'est ça pour moi la participation.
Each and every body, including at the UN. This is what Indigenous participation is about. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. And Yeah, what is I guess what is it something that, because you like, I'm still trying to process everything, and I love how you included, for example, Columbia University in there, because Elsa is next, if not, yeah, she will be next. Definitely, I'm looking forward to her linkage to that as well. What have we not touched upon that you want to talk about? Could be on Africa region, diplomacy, or governance. Any thoughts?
Du point de vue africain, donc représentation africaine ou diplomatie.
Africa.
Alors, il y a beaucoup à faire.
Diplomacy, there is a lot to be
Les
done.
peuples autochtones africains et nos États
indigenous peoples
doivent
and
être
our
davantage impliqués
need
dans le processus
to be
de
more engaged in the
j'invite
participation
également les
process.
parlementaires autochtones,
And I call
les
upon
chefs
indigenous leaders and parliamentarian leaders in Africa
des organisations
and representatives from
des organisations autochtones non
NGOs, indigenous NGOs,
y compris les femmes,
including women. I call upon them to participate in open spaces at UN level. This is where we will be able to make headway in terms of participation of indigenous peoples. We need to all be gathered around the same table, especially with the Tuareg and the people of the Sahel region. I try to talk and discuss with our representatives
de leur expliquer l'importance de tous ces mécanismes, parce que
and
comme
I try to
notre sœur
explain the importance of these mechanisms. And as our colleague from the Pacific region said,
Hunanatu disait donc, qu'il est important de construire des ponts entre l'international et les nationales. Il y a beaucoup
between the national and the international
au
level.
niveau local qui ne sont pas au courant de ce qui se passe.
And there are a lot of people at national or local level that are not aware of what is happening, even at national or international level. So there are different fights.
Mes frères et sœurs africains à emboîter le pas et puis être plus.
So I really call upon our brothers, indigenous brothers and sisters.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for everything.
Find out more information.
Hopefully we can do another session because talk about longer, because I'd like to unpack all your thoughts, because it's you have a brilliant mind. Also, I would like to go more into like your medical background as well, but unfortunately we only have like 15 minutes. So, and thank you so much for your time and being with us. And yeah, definitely looking forward to working with you, temporary committee on NS participation. Again, thank you for your time. Carson, I'm sorry.
Merci à tous, merci à tous, et puis je voudrais reconnaître
Thank you everyone, and I would like to
Elsa,
thank Elsa,
Rodion, Andrea, Carmen,
Carmen,
tout l'effort que vous faites
for your efforts
les questions et les droits des peuples autochtones.
to work on indigenous people's issues. Thank you very much.
So, Mario, before we let you go, I had a lot of questions when I was writing all the time. You had a lot to unpack, and I had questions, and then you kept on answering the question. I wrapped that one, I read another one, and now I think I have another one. Before I let you go, just quickly, how do you view indigenous peoples' movements participation across the UN space, apart from the permanent forum? How can we build a strategic synergy across the platform? Just like 30 seconds.
I had my micro. Donc, si je parle par exemple du cas de la participation de façon générale, donc il faudrait être
participation, generally speaking, we need to be more
par exemple,
organized.
pour la région de l'Afrique, pour le cas de la région de l'Afrique, il nous faut être
African region, for instance,
il y a
we need to be more
un manque de
united.
ressources, il y a le
There's a lack
besoin
of resources.
d'information et de
We need more
sensibilisation sur la
information and awareness
participation.
awarenessing when it
Il
comes
faut
to
aussi du côté
participation.
des autres acteurs
And for other
aller
stakeholders,
au-delà du
we
colonialisme,
need to go
du
beyond
néocolonialisme, du paternalisme,
colonialism, neocolonialism,
dans la protection des
and
intérêts
patronizing
qui
behaviors.
minent la participation
Because
des
this
peuples autochtones. Mais
is
si je reviens maintenant aux autres
toxic
espaces pour
for
la
our
participation au-delà
participation.
des
But if I go
instances
back
permanentes,
to
donc ta question précise,
participation
je vais
beyond
dire,
the forum,
il y a beaucoup d'autres espaces.
well,
Il y a
I think there are many
l'Assemblée
more
générale, il y a
spaces. General
l'instance
Assembly, for
permanente, c'est
instance.
seulement les COSOC, mais il y a l'Assemblée générale, il y a la
There is, of
conférence
course, the
sur
forum,
le
but there is
climat.
more.
Et il y
There
a
is the
aussi
conference on
plus
climate,
basique que ça, il y a les organisations des
but there
Nations
are other
Unies. Donc,
basic
c'est sûr que
bodies,
quand
the
il
UN
y a
itself.
à l'étape de désigner un projet,
So when
d'écrire un
we are at
projet
a step
à propos
when we
des
need
peuples
to draft a
autochtones,
project
on a
about
une
Indigenous
notation
peoples,
parmi les gens
we
qui
need to make sure that there is
désignent, qui
one
réfléchissent sur ce projet,
representative
qui va
from
être
Indigenous
plus
peoples to reflect
respectueux
on these issues,
de
to make sure
l'esprit
that
autochtone, de la façon dont les autochtones,
the ways
de la
that
sensibilité des
Indigenous
autochtones,
peoples
plus que
live
si
and that
n'avait pas un
our
autochtone dans
sensitivity
l'équipe.
and
Donc,
our
c'est tout ça,
spirit is
la
recognized and
participation pour moi,
respected
ça
more
va
than if
au-delà
we
des
didn't have any
tables
Indigenous
rondes.
people
C'est
around the
important
table. I
d'être
think it
dans
goes
les lieux
beyond
de
the forum.
décision
Of
aux
course,
Nations
it's
Unies,
important
à
to be
l'Assemblée générale,
included at all levels of decision-making processes at the
mais il y a
General Assembly,
également au
different
niveau du terrain,
meetings, but
donc
also
une participation
in the field.
gratuite à
We
ces
need
niveaux
better
aussi, pour que
participation.
les
At
organisations,
grassroots level, we
agences,
need to make sure that
entités et fonds des Nations Unies revoient
organizations
leur recrutement aussi. Il faut qu'ils incluent des
show
autochtones. Il y a des talents, on voit qu'il y a beaucoup de
the
talents.
talent of Indigenous
Donc,
peoples.
je les
We have a
encourage
lot of
à ne pas
talented
se
people amongst
priver
Indigenous people, so we
toutes
need
ces
to
belles
encourage
ressources-là. Donc, ça va juste apporter
each and everybody,
plus
each and every organization to
de
leverage
vision globale
our
à leur
resources
et
and
puis à
talented
leur
resources.
réussite et leur durabilité. Merci
And I
beaucoup.
think this will only foster sustainability of our movement and our participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I started by saying that Rodion was the town of knowledge. And now if I were to pack, I think it's almost getting full because of that big knowledge that we're just unpacking and learning and learning. Thank you so much, Mariam, for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and knowledge, especially from your people and all across the spaces that you've been to. And so we're going to our next guest, and I have the honor to introduce one of my first mentors that took me in the baby steps in this movement, Andrea Carmen. She's from the Yaqui Nation, has been a staff member of the International Indian Treaty Council, IRTC, and became executive director in 1992. In 1987, she was one of the indigenous representatives invited to formally address the United Nations General Assembly for the first time in history of the UN Earth Summit +5. In 2006, Andrea was rapporteur for the UN Expert Seminar on Indigenous Peoples' Permanent Sovereignty over natural resources and their relationship to land. The first time an Indigenous woman was selected as a rapporteur for the UN Expert Seminar. In 2019, Andrea was selected by Indigenous peoples in the North America to serve as their representative on the new facilitative working group for the UNFCCC, local communities and Indigenous peoples platform for its first 3 years. Andrea, such a great leadership role, far and wide. Thank you so much for your leadership and welcome to the show. Please, Ghazali, help me run with Andrea.
Thank you so much, Carson. Yeah, full disclosure, I work a lot with Andrea on human rights, oceans. What do I not work with Andrea on? Or IITC, of course. Andrea, first question, I think maybe a very important question. How are you? Because you and your husband were infected by COVID-19. How are you doing right now?
From the Yaqui Nation here in Tucson, Arizona. Thank you for your inquiry of our health, and I will happily report that thanks to traditional medicine and many ceremonies and prayers that were sent from all over the world, we are doing fine now. It was myself, my husband, my son, and my grandson. We all lived together, and we all were struck by the pandemic. Everyone knows, I think, that Arizona in the United States is one of the global hotspots. There are no more intensive care beds left in hospitals here. So we are very lucky that we are able to use our traditional medicines to provide the healing that we need. I would say I'm maybe 95%, better. My energy level is still, affected, but I feel great. I'm working again, and I don't wish this disease on anybody. It's not like the cold or flu, like they say. It's very different and distinct and very contagious. So I wanted to share some pictures if I have a chance to. You might have other questions for me. But I think the impact of COVID-19 is having a strong impact on us understanding where our governance needs to take us. So if that's okay, I don't know if you have any other questions for me. Okay, great. Let's see how I can do this. Great. We've been talking about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it kind of made me smile what Les was saying, how, I was there, of course, for the adoption at the General Assembly, and for many, many years since the 1980s, and in the working group on Indigenous populations, where we began to work on the UN Declaration. And that's where I met Elsa too. We're lovely young ladies. Now we're lovely older ladies. But I think it's really important. One thing that struck me is we were talking that night after it was adopted. None of us really realized that the initials were the DRIP, because we called it the Draft Declaration for so long, so many years. We called it the Draft Deck, for short. And I agree with what Les says, probably Chief Willie Littlechild would, be outraged to hear it called the DRIP. So we say the UN Declaration, even though we know there are many declarations. But we've really been focusing, especially in this time of health crisis, on the article on the right to health, because it has two very important aspects. One is the preservation and protection and revitalization of our traditional medicines and our ways of healing, which also include all of the plants, animals, minerals that we've always used for healing, as well as that knowledge, including intergenerational knowledge transmission, but also the equal access to the healthcare provided by the states. And in many places like Cunayala, Navajo Reservation, and others, this disparity has really been highlighted, by the high death rates of the lack of healthcare facilities that are there. Of course, it's a young lady gathering traditional medicines and plants in California. I need to do something here. Sorry. This technology, I think, is really a lesson for us. But I was talking to Les actually before the program started about how the COVID-19 has forced us in a way to use this technology, but the positive side is the access is there. Of course, we have in the UN Declaration the right to free, prior, informed consent before toxic and hazardous materials are used in our community, but probably free, prior, informed consent is the right that is the least recognized in the Declaration. And this is just our communities in the last year in Rio Yaqui, because we are in both Arizona and Mexico, our Yaqui homeland. with the spraying of the pesticides and then the burning of the pesticide-laden crops by the agribusiness growers that rent the land there, and the high rates of both cancer and asthma that are affecting even our children, our elders. And this, of course, is one of the vulnerabilities that we're experiencing. Our elders, the guidance of our elders is really being re-looked at, you know, in our nations. And this is Roberta Blackgoat. Many of you knew her, you know, many years ago. She's passed on now, but she told us that coal is the liver of Mother Earth and has to stay in the earth for her to be healthy. And this not only, I think, was discussing and reflecting on the impacts of fossil fuel burning on climate change, but also this is the Navajo Nation station, the coal-fired power plant. It just closed at the end of last year, mainly for economic reasons, not because of the many years of protests by the traditional people, but this is coal burning on the Navajo reservation, again, causing asthma, causing cancer, causing contamination that has increased the health vulnerabilities of the Navajo or Dene peoples. And for many weeks, the Navajo Nation experienced the highest level of death rate per capita of any place in the United States. And everyone knows the United States is the first in the world. So this nation, our indigenous peoples in the northern part of Arizona and New Mexico organized their own relief efforts because the government of the United States and even the Navajo Nation government were very slow in getting food to vulnerable families. This is Jarid Yazi. You might know her from the UN Sustainable Development Goals with the mask in front. She organized a lot of these efforts because another aspect that we're really seeing, and we talk about this when we talk about climate change, is the erosion of our food sovereignty as well. So we're not prepared with healthy foods to keep our health and resiliency up, our immune systems, but also when disasters strike, we don't have that capacity to feed our communities. This is another example. Again, we're talking about implementation and revitalization of our traditional methods. This is a roadblock that was put in place by the Oglala Lakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation to prevent the entry of COVID-19, understanding the particular vulnerabilities of our communities. And rather than welcoming this effort, the state of South Dakota, the governor, threatened them with lawsuits and then took the case to the federal government of the United States in opposition of them exercising the treaty right to protect their peoples. This is also South Dakota, and many tribal nations are bringing together youth and elders as well as tribal government to talk about crisis strategic plans that includes ensuring that we have access to local foods when the next pandemic hits, because the vulnerability and the fragility of this corporate food distribution and production has been highlighted, I think, by the pandemic. Establishing indigenous food sovereignty zones is very important and has really increased in importance and awareness among indigenous peoples of things we need to do, our own governance. This is Hawaii, you know, where they're really stepping up, the nation of Hawaii, their traditional food production to feed their own people, so we're not dependent on food coming from outside. And lastly, this is my last picture. We need to restore and strengthen our nation-to-nation diplomacy and trade among indigenous peoples, because if we're depending on the states, on the outside governments, we're going to remain highly vulnerable. This is one of our young IITC staff members. He's Hopi. He's taken traditional seeds from the Tono O'odham Nation here in Tucson up to the Navajo Nation as part of our solidarity, you know, for supporting their food production. So this is a nation-to-nation relationship building, restoring the trade routes that we had in the past as well. And last of all, this is a poster from one of our Indigenous women in North America. And it says, fighting viruses, plagues, pandemics, and biological warfare since 1492. We have to remember that we, those of us on the panel, those of us that are listening, our nations, our peoples, are the descendants of those that knew how to survive and discovered how to survive, even though they threw all these things at us in the past. We can survive, we're survivors, and we have to look at our governance systems to incorporate right to health, including traditional health systems, food sovereignty, and these other aspects, so that we can be survivors today and into the future. So those are just some things I wanted to share that we're thinking about here in North America and in our nation of issues we need to address going forward to strengthen our resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for this impression of the severity of COVID-19 in North America, particularly in Arizona and Navajo Nation. And you talked about diplomacy, so because we're always talking about diplomacy, Indigenous peoples to nations or nation states. You, in the web series, you're the first one to bring in nation to nation, like Indigenous nation to Indigenous nation diplomacy. I would like to unpack that a little bit. Any lessons that you would like to bring to the international level, and any thoughts or ideas from the international level that you would like to bring to the Indigenous to Indigenous nation diplomacy?
Well, I think one thing, because of course IITC was the first Indigenous organization to have consultative status, and now we're so happy that Indigenous peoples from around the world are all participating in such a range of important UN bodies. And I think that Rodion and others have brought this up as well, unless that, we're not only there because our rights are being violated and we have to be insistent that our rights be respected and upheld, but we also have a lot to contribute to these discussions. For example, now the value of local food production. Very high level of food is supplied by family farmers, by small scale farmers, many of whom are Indigenous peoples. And despite this, and the fact the UN recognizes this, there's very little support, whether it be economic or policies or recognition of land and water rights, to support the food production of small producers, which is more necessary now than ever, because here in the United States you could see the meat packing plants, the chicken production plants, all of those were hotbeds of spreading of COVID-19. And really looking at local production, local growing, and we're working to reinstall the use of traditional seeds and begin to trade seeds like we always did, which is part of also resiliency to climate change. But we have to work at the international level, whether it's WIPO, the Convention on Biodiversity, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Local Communities Indigenous Peoples Platform, to protect those seeds so that the biodiversity we have, our resiliency to various climate conditions, is not undermined by genetically modified seeds. So the relationship of what we're doing on the ground and what we have to insist on in the international arena, and that persistence to make sure that we're always cross-feeding what's happening locally, what our traditional knowledge holders are saying they need, and then what we take to the United Nations has to be maintained. And us offering our vision, I think that's what we're doing with the climate change work now. Finally, that's recognized. The value of our traditional practices and ways of knowing for the world has finally been recognized. But how many years did it take? We weren't even allowed to be in the room for negotiation to listen to it, until the last couple years. So I think this is important, making sure that we're taking what our peoples on the local level, what do they need, what are they challenged with, what violations of their rights are they experiencing, but also what they choose to share based on free, prior, informed consent with the international arena, because the survival of the planet is at stake right now.
If you can, Andrea, and if you want to, can you explain a little bit, because how you bridge the grassroots with the International Treaty Council has been around for a long time, general consultative status with ECOSOC, you know, and it's not only human rights, climate change, like you said, pesticides, chemical conventions. How do you include or involve the grassroots with the international level as IITC?
Well, first of all, we prioritize, as Les was saying, you know, constantly bringing in new generations of Indigenous leaders and spokespeoples. IITC is a representative organization. Our members are affiliates, and they're nations, networks, communities, organizations. We don't have individual members. And they tell us through our conferences, through the development of resolutions from food sovereignty conferences and other kinds of gatherings that we have, what they want us to say internationally. What are the issues they're concerned about? What is the obstacles that they're facing to the exercise of their rights? And we take that, and those are our marching orders internationally. Then we also ensure, and we're learning, you know, webinars and all that is another tool to bring that back then and say, okay, this is what happened. What now? What do we do now? And I think several of you that are on this webinar went through trainings that International Indian Treaty Council. In fact, I feel like such an old lady, Ghazali, when I say, I trained your mother, and then I trained you. Pretty soon I'll say, I trained your grandmother, but you know, or to somebody, but you know, Carson and yourself and others, and Elsa's part of that process as well. I think the prioritization of sustainability of this movement has to be, we're bringing in new voices, new spokespeoples, new leaders, and making sure they have the tools they need to work at the international level, as well as the other levels that we need to work at. They're all part of the same movement, and it's very important that we take that traditional knowledge or ways of knowing as a basis for our work. Our people are the experts, not some people named by the UN or professors or anything. Our people are the wisdom holders that we need to listen to for our marching orders in the international arena.
Appreciate it, Andrea. Thank you so much for your time. Maybe you want to plug the upcoming webinar series, maybe, or something else you want to?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we just finished a 10 webinar series on the rights of Indigenous peoples in the COVID epidemic. And we're planning to have a second series, maybe shorter, less, maybe 3 or 4, on what have we learned? What are the lessons that we've learned, which I've shared a little bit from our region, from the COVID-19 epidemic. You know, this is a very, very strong lesson, and we need to look at it, you know, and we need to say, how do we need to change the way we do our work, the way we work in our communities? What are we going to keep? What are we going to strengthen? What are we going to let go? And so I've already begun asking some of you, you know, to take part in that. And I think we're going to start that on August 10th. Whatever that Friday is. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but we'll put that out and ask all of you to disseminate it, and some of you also to be on that, to start to think about, because we always say spiritually, everything happens for a reason. This is a hard lesson we're learning right now. It's a hard lesson. We're losing so many of our elders, you know, so does that mean we of the next generation need to step up and accelerate the use of that knowledge that they left us? You know, what do we need to do? And it's very interesting that Mother Nature is specifically targeting the human family with this lesson. You know, this COVID-19 affects human beings, unlike climate change, which affects all living things. So this is a lesson for us as humans and as Indigenous peoples. What is the lesson? What have we learned? What are we going to do different? So that's what we want to talk about. So think about that, everybody, and we'll let you know how you can take part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for your time and for participating in this webinar series. I know up next is Elsa, so Carson, and I know she's very much looking forward to contributing to this conversation as well. So Carson, yeah, you can take it away, introduce her.
First of all, thank you, Andrea, and thank you for your spirituality in everything that you've just said. That was very touching. All of us here are praying for you and your people. And personally, I'm forever grateful for your teachings and guidance, of course, continuing to all that's for the hands. We work hand in hand with Victor, whom you introduced me to. Thank you so much. And so over to our next guest, quite as well powerful, and she's among the people who have introduced me to the space and teaching us every now and then, and she's available all the time. Elsa, what can I say? So Elsa Stamatopoulos, she's the Director of Indigenous Peoples Rights Program at the Institute of the Study of Human Rights in Columbia University, New York. She joined the university in 2011 after 31 years at the United Nations at a post in Vienna, Geneva, and New York in Indigenous Affairs since 1981. Oh my goodness, I was thinking about less, but this Elsa is on another level. She has become the first chief of the Secretariat of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in 2003. Her academic background is in law, criminal justice system, international law, and political science. Her research and writings cover a variety of human rights topics. Oh my goodness. And just to say something before Elsa speaks, Elsa in Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, that is because she was part of the editorial of a book that we wrote together with Columbia University's Institute of the Study of Human Rights. Thank you so much for your leadership, Elsa. I wish I was going to be the one talking again and taking you through the interview. Ghazali, please.
Go ahead. Seriously, you can take it. You can go. I'll start out with the first question, and you can take over. I'm very comfortable with that. So I'll do the first question, Elsa, and then I'll let Carson do the rest. Elsa, I'll do it quickly. What is the most significant time that you experienced in the Indigenous movement? And welcome, of course.
So I want to say, first of all, congratulations for organizing this, to all of you personally and your organizations that have supported you. It's really fantastic during these times that we cannot be together physically to continue the work in this way. I know Andrea has done it and so many of you have done it, so I really appreciate it, and I don't miss an opportunity to participate when somebody opens this up. So this question that you are asking, Ghazali, is really very difficult for me because there have been so many amazing moments in the Indigenous movement, but I will tell you the one I choose. I think it is seeing the beginnings of Indigenous direct participation at the UN. I mean, I go back to 1982 and 1983 and seeing this exceptional, out of the ordinary and outside the UN rules participation that managed to become part now of the UN rules. First, what we called acquiescence. We were building this practice, we were giving it a name, and now to see that this participation is formally included even in the ECOSOC resolution that established the permanent forum, because the resolution referred to the practices of the working group, and that's how Indigenous peoples participate. So I think for me, having lived through that and the creation of this new customary rule of international law, I would call it today, is one of the most exciting things. And seeing the difference in the room of the working group on indigenous populations between 1982 and 1983, when they formalized, they said now indigenous peoples can directly participate. Seeing this, it was really a feeling that indigenous peoples were making history. It was history in the making as we were breathing in that room. So for me, this is the big thing. And it was also indigenous peoples, you know, linking up with the decolonization movement, the anti-racist movement, and all these are relevant today, of course. You know? So these were, for me, I select this moment because it has also meant so much for the indigenous movement at the international level until today.
Carson, I believe it is now your turn to ask a question.
Go ahead. I'll just come over. I have some questions for Professor Elsa. Just a few minutes. Just go ahead.
Okay, that's okay. Elsa, thank you so much. And what is, in your view, like the biggest change COVID-19 is bringing to indigenous peoples, the movement? Yeah, any thoughts on that?
I think that the biggest thing it's bringing is an urgency, and a sense of urgency. I mean, we all, when we are living in indigenous communities, together with indigenous communities, we know that there's always an urgency, but this one put our finger on this incredible risk and urgency that is reminiscent, actually, of the spreading of diseases in the earlier colonial times. So this is a moment that has to be, that brings those memories, and that I think re-energizes the indigenous peoples and those around them, you know, about this urgency. So this is one of the things. The other thing that I find as a new thing, new or continuing, is how impressed we have been to see the leadership, the immediate leadership that indigenous peoples took around COVID. So when a lot of the world was still numb, civil society didn't know what to do, indigenous peoples came in doing the webinars, obviously through the internet. And I know Andrea organized so many of them, and others did. And this was a fantastic thing of the strength. It was another testimony of the amazing strength of the indigenous movement for this. And the other thing that I feel is special right now is how indigenous peoples should strategize with specific actors that were perhaps a little bit less active, like the World Health Organization. I mean, these are opportunities now for WHO, which has been one of our most difficult clients, so to speak, in indigenous affairs. They have to speak out. How can we make them now speak out? The WHO has to speak out, and the General Assembly, as it's coming up, you know, in any resolution on COVID, it has to include indigenous peoples. And for this reason, I think it's a fantastic idea that the report of our new special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples, Francisco Cali, will be on COVID and indigenous peoples' rights. And lastly, I want to say, and Andrea mentioned it, how the value of traditional knowledge through COVID is again coming up, both in terms of medicinal plants, but also spiritual practices, but also political practices, like closing the borders of the communities that indigenous peoples have known how to do to protect themselves over time.
Thank you so much, Elsa, and to giving that in a very elaborate way. The indigenous diplomacy, you have been chief of the Secretary of the Permanent Forum for a while now. Anything what do you think that the future will be post-COVID-19 of Indigenous diplomacy? Any observations, of thoughts or ideas maybe?
I think that Indigenous, you know, I am learning from Indigenous diplomacy, which is very special. It is not just, my fellow panelists and friends said that, it's not like a common state diplomacy. Indigenous diplomacy is advocacy as well. It is trying to change hearts and minds, and Indigenous peoples have done it from the very beginning. So it's not just a permanent form, and as Andrea said, it's broader, and Rodion mentioned, there are so many fora where Indigenous peoples are now, you know, spreading their efforts, their international advocacy, that there is no way back, you know, meaning in a good way. It cannot be stopped. It is only spreading. So, and I see various other characteristics that I would like to share, you know, in Indigenous diplomacy. Les, I think was, I forget who mentioned, maybe Les mentioned, or Mariam mentioned protocols. So Indigenous peoples have been pushing forward their own protocols in international fora, and that matters. So their diplomacy is also a way of bringing in their own rules. It's not just the UN rules, it's also their own rules and their own cultures and protocols that are meaningful for them at the United Nations. So that's another characteristic. And yet another that I know you all alluded to is, you know, the gender approach and the intergenerational approach. So you see at the UN, Indigenous Peoples diplomacy, you see this collaboration, you know, with the gender, the elders, the youth, and all this plays together. And this is a fantastic characteristic that it should continue. Another one that I have learned from Kenneth Deere, because he used these words very, very wisely. He says, never lose the moral high ground. This is very inspiring, very important part of Indigenous diplomacy. So Indigenous peoples have continued to use that. And this is part of their diplomacy because they affect, I mean, what we have seen, and Andrea, I'm sure you've seen it too since the beginning. You see sometimes that diplomats of states have a certain line to keep, which is strict, but the diplomat person has been convinced by what the Indigenous peoples are sharing in the room, you know? So that person that has been, whose heart and mind has been convinced, can play a real role in how they navigate the position of their government or in the multilateral relations. So these are very precious strategies of the Indigenous peoples. Another characteristic is the link with grassroots people. I mean, Indigenous peoples, whether they are NGOs, they are academics, whatever they are, it is that special link with the grassroots people, with the communities, that makes the voice, that has the impact in the international diplomacy. And last but not least, and I think this is a very important point, is that part of Indigenous diplomacy is also to not be diplomatic when you should not be diplomatic. And you should not, and Indigenous peoples are not absorbed by the dominant agenda, the mainstream agenda. They use it. They use the main international agenda, but they are not absorbed by it. So if they need to put forward this other topic, whatever that is, and for example, traditional knowledge has received such focus because Indigenous peoples have have strengthened that, have put that forward. So these are characteristics that of indigenous diplomacy that I will see continuing, you know, and I see them continuing also by younger generations of indigenous leaders like you, Ghazali, and you, Carson, you know, and I'm very inspired by that. I don't see why these learnings of the movement over 50 years should be lost, you know, they're just continuing.
I think that's a very good bridge, by the way, to the project that you're doing right now. I'm very interested to see it manifest. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and how we as a movement can contribute to it or help you with it?
Okay, maybe I should say first what this project is, although some of my fellow panelists have heard about it because I have interviewed them. So this project is about what fascinated me, impressed me so much and taught me so much from 1982 or 81, really has become now a total obsession. I want to be able to tell and explain this story of indigenous participation at international fora, also as an expression of external self-determination of indigenous peoples. It is one of those expressions, external self-determination, which sometimes states don't understand well and think that it might be threatening, but it's not threatening. It's very constructive. So this project tries to tell that story from the point of view of the indigenous peoples who participated, not just the rules of, but it is to understand exactly how indigenous peoples were able to establish this exceptional participation, which, by the way, I call corrective exceptionalism, because it is a way, it is a manifestation that states knew that they had done something wrong, they still know that, and they're trying to correct it by allowing these exceptions in participation. And of course, now indigenous peoples are trying higher and higher participation, pushing like through the General Assembly that we know very well. So this is my project, and I have already interviewed a number of indigenous leaders, and I would like to interview more leaders. Unfortunately, now we cannot meet face to face, but the help I would appreciate is if there are some younger leaders that are interested to answer some questions around this, it would be very enriching for this project. And for me, I feel that this project is part of the continuation, you know, of passing on knowledge and information and understanding over generations. It's like bringing our experiences of the older people into the younger people. So.
Wow, thank you, Elsa. And just learned a new term called corrective exceptionalism. And I think just to add something on there, this one has exacerbated the issue of member states or even some international NGOs and some UN agencies tokenizing the participation of the indigenous peoples. And so we definitely about these new project that you're doing, we really support, and let us know what we can do to help you with a new project. First, I'm the first one that I would like to give myself to support you on that. Because time is running out, but I have two more questions, just one, and in a short time. What do we need to do today so that we don't regret not doing it in the next 6 to 12 months?
Another difficult question, but I will propose just 3 points. One is continue to go to the highest international political level. I think Mariam mentioned this as well. High political profile is super important, and COVID gives this additional or new opportunities for that. And don't hesitate to use harsh words when you need to characterize some practices as, for example, genocidal. We have heard this word, happen regarding the Amazon. So we should not hesitate using very hard words these days. The second is what I mentioned before about WHO and the General Assembly of the UN making sure they always mention indigenous in the context of COVID. And the third is make sure to build strategic alliances that this moment gives birth to. And I'm very inspired from what Native Americans did with the Black Lives Matter these days, with some very good, positive results. These days, there are more Columbus statues falling than we have seen, I don't know, since centuries. So, in each country, there are different strategic alliances. Obviously, it's up to the indigenous peoples to analyze and to see who they are at a specific moment. But these are the possibilities of novelty and new social and political alliances that can strengthen indigenous peoples as well.
Wow. Then before I say something, commenting, the last question. What about, just in a few seconds, what about something that we've not touched upon that you are proud of, curious about, and you want people thinking about?
One big thing, international politics, because you asked me to think about international politics, right? Is that a room of people, full of people in international political discussions is never the same unless indigenous peoples are there. This is so clear, and I just want to make sure to put it out there. There is no way to compare such rooms with or without the indigenous peoples. So indigenous participation at the international level has to continue to be strategic, to be informed, etc. But indigenous peoples have to be there, And to add also that this was a moment that I shared with the first chair of the Permanent Forum, Mr. Henrik Maga, right, from the Sami, where in the second session we were looking at the room. It was, I don't know, 1,500 people. It was very exhilarating. It was a good moment, right? And then we turned to each other and we said, but we cannot just be pleased because this permanent forum was created and it's high level and big deal. Unless the people come, it will not be what it has to be. So these are like my last words, that people have to continue making the effort of this intense participation.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Elsa. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your wisdom in supporting the movement. We will always pray for your strength and support system and for you to be in good health, always, to always be in this alliance. And the key takeaway here is yesterday's words by Ken was never lose the moral high ground. Thank you for reiterating today. It's key in combating the whole issues, the stereotyping, and giving you the strength to always say the truth. I can go back. It was the most powerful words. Ghazali, if you allow me, I can go to the next guest because we have a few minutes. Okay, we have Johnson Seda. He's a member of the Quechua community of Limon culture in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Johnson, I've been to the Quichua people of Sarayaku in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and 7 days without the phone, without internet, without calls, just interacting with Mother Nature. That was extremely powerful. And if you come from these people, I want to hear much more about you. Mr. Sida, as he studies in law, political science, human rights, and democracy, Mr. Sida has worked with indigenous organizations and has collaborated with 2 Ecuadorian government institutions working on indigenous issues. He has also worked with 2 non-governmental organizations based in Washington, D.C., co-director of Amazon Alliance and advisor on indigenous issues for Conservation International. Participated as well on UNFCCC negotiations since 2000, advocating for Indigenous peoples' rights, and it's currently the director of dedicated grant mechanism for Indigenous peoples and local communities. Wow, Ghazali, please.
Yeah, Johnson, welcome, and Carson, thank you so much for leading this in, and also like the segment with Elsa. Johnson, welcome. Hope you're doing okay. Know you primarily through UNFCCC, very active. One of the experts in my view, also like on the bridge of like the indigenous movement side as well as the NGO side. In your view, what role can an international NGO play in the indigenous movement, and what role do you play within it as a Quechua?
Hi, Ghazali, Carson, and panelists. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. Yes, well, I'm from the Ecuador Amazon. You said that you went to Sarayaku, that is in the center of the Amazon in Ecuador. I live I'm from the north of the Amazon, border with Colombia and Peru. So very close to the big Napo River there. Okay, in relation to your question, Ghazali, about the role of NGOs, I've been working closely with environmental NGOs in most of my time since 2000. And what I see is that we are natural partners because they're interested in conservation. We are also interested, we don't use the word of conservation, but we are doing the same activities. Sometimes we have different views in terms of perhaps the ownership, because NGOs mostly work with the governments and not directly with communities sometimes. And the ownership is an issue, but then, you know, the end goal is the same. And I think with the NGOs, I've seen that they've been using a lot the UN in order to implement their internal policies and work with communities. And I've seen at least in Conservation International, they have in their own policies, you know, the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples, and they have, you know, been working on policies like the free priming from consent also for their activities. So that's a great thing and helps a lot in the work, you know, at the ground level with communities. So that is one thing. You know, the other thing is helping bringing those practices from the ground level to the international policy. And I've seen a lot of interest. I remember that like 8 or 9 years ago that we started working with several NGOs in order to support indigenous peoples in the negotiations of climate change. And it was fantastic to see how we can combine the expertise from different NGOs and also expertise from indigenous organizations to put together and help indigenous leaders to, you know, get updated information or to have access to the latest information for the negotiation. So that was really interesting. So that's why I believe that if we can work together with, you know, indigenous movement and NGOs in specific areas from the ground to the policy level. So in terms of my role there, I was invited to work with Conservation International almost 11 years ago. We started working with a group of indigenous advisors. We call it indigenous advisors. And we had people there, you know, inviting them to visit countries like Guyana. We went to Ecuador, we went to Peru, and we visited there the, you know, the Minister of Environment, Agriculture, the foreign affairs ministers, all of them in order to talk about the issues of indigenous peoples. And it was interesting because they were sharing the experiences that they were having in their own country and also learning on what was happening in those countries. So that is the first thing I started doing. And we invited, actually, we had in the group Kaningi from Africa, we had Mina, we had colleagues from Guyana, David James, who is the lawyer in there, he's an indigenous lawyer. We have Paulo Pancanaru and others, other colleagues. And we had that interesting group, and we used to, after a week of conversations with governments and communities, make some recommendations for the country. So that's how we started there. And I facilitated that. And then, I was saying about these 8 years, or more or less, or 9 support to the negotiation. We started with Latin America, and then we made it a little bit global. And it was fantastic, to support that. And I'm happy that being in an international NGO, I've been facilitating this process in order to support, whatever we're trying to achieve at the international level as indigenous movement.
Johnson, if you can, conversation post-COVID-19, any positive or challenging experiences in the conversations that are, or discussions that are developing, what is the latest? Can you update us on that, and or what do you want Indigenous people to think about based on those conversations?
You mean in terms of the COVID-19?
In terms of, I can imagine, because what we're seeing is that talking about FPIC, self-determination, but project-based things. Is it what are you seeing in those conversations?
Well, in terms of for instance, free, prior, and informed consent, that is an issue that we've been discussing internally, because since COVID-19, it's among us, and it's difficult to implement the FPIC in a regular basis as we used to implement. And what we've been talking internally is that I think we need to strengthen the capacity of the communities in order to let them to run the process, and not just going from outside, with a consultant to be there to observe, the process of the consultation or the process of the free, prior, and informed consent, but, creating new capacities or strengthening the capacity of the communities. That's the one thing to go forward if they want to really move in a project. We've been discussing in something very specific. For instance, there are, I think, interest to implement or to approve projects under the Green Climate Fund, or let's say the GEF. They, according to their policies, in order to implement activities in communities, they need to work on the free, prior, and informed consent first, with the communities. And the question was, how are we going to do that if we are in the COVID-19? So we have to stop the process or continue the process. That's why the answer was, okay, we need to build the capacity at a local level, because we cannot go there to the communities. So that's something that we've been discussing internally on how to strengthen the communities. But then also, it's not only that, as you know, in the communities, everything is holistic. And what we have seen is also that a lot of things in the communities are happening at this point. For instance, in my own community, I see that they never had any kind of support from the government, and they had COVID. I don't know, perhaps the entire community, but they use only their traditional medicine. And the question is how we are going to empower, what they've been doing as a practice, having the traditional medicine, because nobody passed away in the community, and they've been using local medicine, but the government is not recognizing anything. Just something interesting or funny that happened a couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, that, our organization, ConfiniI in Amazon, got like the PCR test, like 40 tests for my community. So they went to collect that, They went to the community in order to use that and test in the community and see, you know, the situation there. And the doctors, the local doctors there, not only in my community, but in the area, they said that they would like to use those tests for them first. They were demanding, like, they want 20 tests for doctors, and then they can help the community. And it was a fight saying that, hey, this is something we got for our community and not for you guys. You're working with the government. You should have your own, you know, tests from the government in order to work here, and not just trying to take half of what we have gotten from our own organization. So that is something that's happening. So we say that always, you know, the government trying to take whatever we are getting there in the community. So efforts are happening in the communities. The recognition is still, you know, like the recognition of whatever we are doing in the community. That's something as usual. And I think we need to work on that as well from our side, from community side. So in the context of organizations, so where we are watching that, and we are seeing how we can empower that process happening just now in the community, and not just leaving, you know, away the government with their responsibilities, but also calling the government to do something else there in the community.
And Johnson, let's talk a little bit about diplomacy, because UNPFII do a lot of diplomacy in there. In the UN in general, we see groups and alliances gain importance in many venues. We've seen it under climate change. We see it at the General Assembly, human rights, everywhere else. Your thoughts on best ways that Indigenous peoples can influence them?
Well, let's start with the problems. I don't know if this is positive or it's a problem, but Indigenous peoples, usually we focus in a couple things only. I remember, you know, being since 2000 there, I know how we've been working on that. When Red Plus started, everybody wanted to focus on Red Plus. Then they forgot the rest of the negotiations. Everybody was there. And even we created, you know, working groups within our international forum, but everybody was just focused on Red Plus. And now we are focusing mostly Article 1, paragraph 135, you know, the traditional knowledge, the platform, but then again, we are forgetting the rest of the activities. What I've seen is, for instance, as the NDC is one of the key issues of the Paris Agreement, I've seen that NGOs and governments, they have created the NDC Alliance. And I don't see that we are participating there. They are working on capacity building for the governments. They're working on designing policy for the governments. We are not there. So I asked them how we can get there. They say, well, you guys are welcome. You are invited to come, but we are not part of that because we are focused on those specific topics. And the key themes of the Paris Agreement is the NDCs. And I think that means that when we go, even the participation is fantastic. Sometimes we get like 100 people, 100 indigenous leaders in the negotiations. But I think we need still to create capacities in our leaders in order to focus on, you know, those different topics to influence in the negotiations. And that is the problem. Sometimes I see two challenges there. Sometimes we go there and with no preparation, just to focus on one specific topics, and everybody going to 2 or 3 topics. And then the other issue is the language. For instance, in Latin America, at least, we all speak Spanish, and that is difficult. Once I've seen that, you know, the Bolivians, usually they used to take like 15, 20, or 25 members in the official delegation. But since they don't have any skills in English, they used to be always in the caucus and trying to take over the caucus, and they were proud because they took over the caucus, and they said, now we have the leadership in the caucus. But we said, we have to influence the governments, not to the caucus here. He's just to coordinate the work. So that's one of the problems I've seen from Latin America, at least. And that's why we started 9 years ago to prepare people, but still I see that we need to continue preparing our leaders in order to participate meaningfully in the negotiations. So that's, I think, we need to do in order to engage in different alliances and those important things that it's out there now.
Definitely, and I 100% support you in your thought that we should not like zoom in too much on one process, especially in a UNFII. I saw it personally, and the platform negotiations for the local communities and the people platform. Everyone was focused on the platform negotiations, but so that's on the left, but on the right, they were talking about the Paris rulebook, which is also, if not more important than the platform. So I think I very much agree with you, what you just said about making sure that we are involved in all the processes. There's a perception out there, Johnson, by some Indigenous peoples that the UNFII is quote unquote child's play. It is nothing compared to Geneva and or New York. What would you say to prove them wrong?
Well, you know, the climate change is a big issue. So first of all, and then Indigenous peoples are the key players there because I just remembered that the coming CEO for the Jeff, he was saying that we cannot make anything if we don't have Indigenous people fully effectively participation in the negotiations. And he is committed to do that. And I believe that because we are key players there, we are living in the key ecosystems, and we can contribute a lot because we have knowledge. We are not just going there to say that just we want to hear or influence in something. We are saying that we want to contribute because we have knowledge, and with that knowledge we can perhaps help to solve the problems that we have in the world. So that's why I believe it's key, not only in the international negotiation but also in key aspects of the country's commitment under the Paris Agreement. So I think it's that way I should go.
Any quickly, what is any process or business that you would like Indigenous peoples in general to participate in more? Elsa talked about WHO. Anything that you think that is a blind spot? You talked about NDCs. What else is out there that Indigenous people should be more involved in?
Well, something that we are not focusing much, I believe it's something related to economic, perhaps local economy development. Since I've been working with NGOs in partnership with indigenous organizations in 2000, I remember that we had meetings where NGOs wanted to organize a protest against oil companies, mining companies, or something, but communities say that, yeah, we can. We are the first ones protesting against them. That's correct. But also we need to develop our economy because people need to do something in the community. And that is something I've seen that we are not focusing much. Not to, well, first of all, in our organizations, we are, the organizations, at least in my country, we are created to protect the land, to recover the land, and to get the title of our land. And that work still need to be done. But we need to have people prepared in order to support our own community members for economic development. I see in my own community, we are working with, some reforestation, some, productive things, but we don't have any guidance from our own organization. We are saying we have our organization, yes, we feel members of the organization, but we are not receiving any guidance. Perhaps we need to prepare something around that in our own organization in order to receive a proper advice on that. I've seen really interesting projects everywhere in the world, but we are not trying to amplify those nice experiences that we are having in communities, and that is something is missing. And I don't know how we're going to do that. So far, we've been trying to work on policies on climate change, biodiversity, and all of that. Protection is good, but we also eat birds, we also eat wildlife, we also eat things that it's part of the economy. So how we're going to do that? I don't know who is working on that. I'm not sure.
Okay. Johnson, thank you so much for your words. One last question, 2 minutes out. What have we not touched upon that you're proud of, curious about, or want people thinking about? I think you've seen that we ask all the guests about this. Your takeaway, please.
Let's see. Perhaps having new people in the process. You know, I started in 2000, but I see a lot of new faces now. I'm happy, I'm proud because of we are having new people, and that is, you know, work done by several organizations. You were saying Andrea is working with you guys, and also we've been working with some fellows and trying to create new leadership, not create, to bring up, you know, to the international arena, to new leaders. That's the intention that we have. I'm happy with that. And also I'm happy that I've been focused on climate change, and sometimes I see people engage in several conventions, like the certification by diversity, and every forum I've seen the same people, but it's good to focus on something and advance on that, right? And that is key. I'm happy. Once a friend told me that, why you are focusing on climate change? That is not relevant. Perhaps it's something that's gonna, you know, go in 5 years and nothing is gonna happen. But I'm proud that we have advanced a lot there. Now we have language on indigenous rights, indigenous peoples in the, you know, formal documents in the climate change arena. So I'm happy with that. I'm proud of that. And I remember that once we celebrated in 2006 in Nairobi, when, you know, the first time they introduced it, the traditional knowledge in the whole climate change text. So we thought that was our language, you know, as indigenous peoples. But now we have the knowledge of indigenous peoples and other knowledge system under the Paris Agreement. So yeah, I'm proud of that, and happy that you know, new faces we're having in the negotiations. And the only thing perhaps I'm a little bit curious is that, you know, this connection between the international policy with the local elders, knowledge holders. And I believe the platform is key in the climate change and the climate change convention. And I'm really expecting to see how this platform is going to be implemented, because I see opportunities for our knowledge holders to engage and you know, influence meaningfully in the negotiations. So that is my expectation there. And I'm curious to see how we're gonna do that, because of the COVID-19, you know, those face-to-face meetings are canceled and only virtual meetings, and I don't see our elders doing, you know, virtual sessions right there from the forest.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I like your background, by the way. It gives me sweet memories about Bobonasa River. It was very therapeutic to be with your people. Like I said, 7 days without internet, no phone calls, no nothing. And we're used to social media, so I learned a lot, ceremonies, and shared with them. So much important. Thank you, Johnson, for your view.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for your leadership, and we hope to advance these conversations beyond today. And so, yes, to our amazing relations listening and our wonderful guests today, we just wanted to end today's conversations and how to Indigenous now. We hope you enjoyed episode 3 of the webinar series. The next episode will be on Friday, July 31st, 2 p.m. same as today, GMT +2, with new guests from all over the world. You can sign up right now. Go to linktree.ee/Gomaluku. We thank the interpreters for their amazing support, the guests for sharing their thoughts and time, and the partners in this special series, that is Tuomas Aslak Juuso, the DOCIP, Drumbeat Media, and TV Indigena. Please help us keep the conversation growing on Twitter. #HowToIndigenousNow, and you can tag Ghazali in your post at Gomaluku. Feel free to share any questions, screenshots, and feedback. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Unfortunately, we didn't have our colleague, Hortensia Hidalgo. I hope I pronounced pronounce your name correctly. She did not make it today, and we're just grateful to have all of you today in this webinar. Thank you so much for those who work up early, like Andrea. I know, like Les, it's getting late there, and we're all working hard to make sure that we do these in this with all the differences in the time zones and everything. Thank you so much for having us today, and we received some feedback from the social media. You see, we are so grateful of your comments. Let us know what you think, and we're grateful always. Thank you, everybody. Have a good moments.